Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm DJ Sixsmith. Welcome to Sit Down. Michelle C. Thomas is here with us. She is a lawyer. We're going to talk about COVID-19 and divorce. Michelle, how are you?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm doing really well. So 2020 has been a crazy year. There has been a lot going on, but one of the things that's kind of been happening under the radar is that COVID-19 has really impacted divorce rates. And you were somebody that works with a ton of different divorce cases. What has it been like the last 7 months? Why don't we just start broad picture here with everything?
Sure. It's been nuts for the past few months. I mean, the divorce filings have skyrocketed, primarily since the courts have reopened following the quarantine. I mean, it's sort of like the pandemic created a perfect storm for couples who are already contemplating divorce. And I mean, I'm sure you would agree, like marriage is hard enough, but with COVID, oh my goodness, it's been that much harder for so many families. I mean, and think about it, being locked in a house together for months on end just brought a lot of the issues that previously were sort of swept under the rug to the surface. So couples who may have previously been able to tolerate each other for a few hours per day because of the commute time, and then after work, maybe going to the gym or happy hour, things of that nature, were suddenly stuck. And all of those social outlets were just really taken away from all of us almost overnight. So they were actually left to deal with and talk to each other. And some people realized, well, wait a minute, this is not actually who I want to do life with. And it just created a perfect storm for all this conflict to ensue. And then when you throw in the financial stress that the pandemic caused, from furloughs to layoffs, many couples, as we know, are already living paycheck to paycheck. So that just exacerbated the situation. Then, of course, there's conflict over children and who they should be allowed to play with, whether they should be homeschooled or sent out. And it was just all this conflict that may not have ever been an issue before suddenly became issues for a lot of couples. And then there's just the emotional side of it too, like the lack of personal space, the lack of things to do with your significant other. All of that contributed to the pressure that arose during the pandemic, and ultimately caused a lot of couples to say, you know what, I'm ready to throw in the towel. And so what I noticed is that around July, sort of right when the courts were reopening, that's when there was a surge in calls to the office, people saying that they wanted to get a divorce, to have a consultation right away. Didn't matter what the finances were, they wanted to come in for a consultation because they just could not take it anymore. And I think that's what's been seen from practitioners across the board. The last data and statistics I've seen has shown that there's been about a 30% increase in divorce filings post-quarantine. And that definitely sounds about right. We've been bombarded, we meaning divorce practitioners, I believe, have been bombarded with calls and filings from couples who could not take it. And this was just the straw that broke the camel's back.
I think it's really fascinating on a number of different levels. And you mentioned the fact that courts were closed for a long time. So now that courts are back in session, what does that look like? I mean, are these sessions a little bit shorter than normal? There's so many different cases. How's this all going down now?
There's been so many changes, I have to tell you. One, the courts are backlogged. So unless you have some sort of urgent emergency situation, you should expect to wait to get your case back on the docket. I mean, think about it. Cases, the dockets from March all the way through until about June, all those cases that were canceled have to be rescheduled. So you should expect to wait, which is why I always encourage people to really try to settle the legal issues that they have, because if you're waiting on the court system to quote unquote have your day in court, you may be waiting a while. And then if you do get to court, oh my goodness, it's so weird that we're now doing these trials by Zoom. We're literally having full multiple day trials on child custody and divorce and alimony and all these issues via Zoom. So we are, imagine showing multiple exhibits via share screen. It's almost a nightmare. And then you're not necessarily there to actually communicate with your client. You may have to be typing or chatting. So there's a lot of significant differences just within the court system. So if you can attempt to communicate with your either spouse or your estranged spouse and try to work on resolution, that would certainly be the recommendation at this point.
You mentioned the deal with Zoom. So for specific couples, like, are they on just two separate Zooms in some of these scenarios in the same place? Have they left the place? Like, How are some of these situations going down? Because the technology just makes it even more intriguing on a different level here.
Yeah, well, I think like a lot of us who had to pivot during the pandemic pretty quickly and turn our workspaces into this suddenly this virtual remote workforce, I think Zoom and technology has had to do the same thing. So now we have Zoom has these breakout rooms. So when you join and log in, you can then be separated into separate rooms with your attorney, and you're literally sitting face to face with your attorney or the other side looking at each other, but in separate rooms. And then you may have a mediator going back and forth. And what's really weird with some of the court actual proceedings, the judge may be in the courtroom. So you see the judge on the bench, but you, the attorneys, the witnesses, they're all in this sort of virtual waiting room via Zoom in order to have their time awaiting their time to testify. So there's a lot of changes. And if you don't evolve with the changes, you will be left behind. Absolutely.
Do you think the divorce rate will stay like this, or do you think like life will kind of return to some sense of normalcy?
I think it's going to be driven by this pandemic. Honestly, if we go back into what they're calling this sort of the second phase or second surge of it, if we have to regress in terms of a lockdown or things of that nature, which I hope we don't, it's going to stay like this, I think, because just being stuck, and I hate to say it that way, but that's what it is, with someone that you may have only just said, it's not so bad. You only see each other 1-2 hours a day and you go on about your life and your business. But now that we don't have all these social outlets, it's becoming increasingly difficult. So until life as we know it goes, quote unquote, back to normal, I would anticipate there being a continued surge of divorce filings, a continued surge of separations. And it's unfortunate, but people just are at the end and they can't take it. And then also, I hate to mention this, but just the mortality of what we're dealing with in terms of the rates of death, I think it's making a lot of people take a step back and evaluate their lives, evaluate their relationships, and reconsider whether this is the person that they want to spend their life with or how they want to spend their life. So I think it's also motivating people to take a lot of deeper time to reflect, and also we now have more time, a lot of us, because we don't have all the activities, we're running here and there, and people are just making that decision to say, you know what, not anymore, I can't do this anymore. So yeah, until we really get back to life as normal, I see this continuing, this trend.
Have you had anybody that has gotten married during this year, during the pandemic, that has already decided to get a divorce, or has that not happened yet based on everything?
I don't think enough time has passed technically for parties to have married and separated during the pandemic. So I haven't seen that. I have seen couples proceed with marriage plans who had already previously may have planned a wedding or something during this time. Certainly there's still been calls for prenups and things of that nature, but I haven't yet seen there be a marriage and a separation within these past few months. Not that it's not possible, but not just yet. It hasn't, I guess, gotten that bad, so to speak.
Michelle, you mentioned a lot of different reasons why people are getting divorced. Can you pinpoint one reason that seems to be more popular and more consistent across the board? Is it just the fact that we have just differences that are not going to be made whole at this point? Or is it really the strain of the financial situation, stuff with kids? Like, what would you say is the number one thing right now?
From what I've seen, it's really the emotional aspect of what's happening. I think even more so than the financial aspect is the fact that people are realizing that they don't necessarily like their spouse, because finance has always been an issue. I mean, people have always had financial strains. There may be job loss suffered, there's ups and downs. But if a marriage was already strong to begin with, that's not necessarily going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. The fact that there may have been a furlough or some financial strain that's occurring right now. But it's for those couples who are already sort of on the rocks and already having some challenges. Those are the couples that this was enough to say, okay. So I think it's really just the emotional aspect, the not having your personal space and then having the time to really deeply reflect on who this other person is. And you may have even noticed personality traits or character traits that you may not have even paid attention to previously before being locked in the house together and in a space together for all this time. I mean, 3, 4, 5 months, that's a long time to
Mhm.
be looking at one person. And then, you know, if you have both people working from home or working remotely, no outlet there, then you have the children on top of it all. So the conflicts of just being in that same space is what's driving, I think, a lot of people to say, I've got to change my circumstances because this is just not going to work.
So if a couple called up today saying, hey, I want to get divorced, how long would it take to get this whole process complete? Like, obviously you have to get into court, you have to have the case, but can you at least ballpark how much time it would take from point A all the way to the finish line here?
Sure. So for a lot of, in some of the jurisdictions, if you're able to reach a settlement agreement, that means you've signed a document, you've signed a contract that resolves all the legal issues coming out of your case, whether it be child support, child custody, property distribution, spousal support, things like that. So you've resolved all the legal issues. You're then looking at filing for what's called an uncontested divorce. For uncontested divorce, those are very short hearings, and there's a greater opportunity that you can file your case and actually get that maybe 15-minute time increment and get your divorce pretty quickly. And there are some jurisdictions where there's no waiting period at all. If you sign a settlement agreement, you can file the complaint for divorce right away. In those cases that are contested, where you're looking at scheduling hearings and scheduling trial dates and going through this whole litigation process, I would say that you're looking at probably, certainly not anytime this year, getting into court, even just to even sometimes have initial scheduling conferences. Now, of course, that varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, of course, but generally speaking, you're looking at a pretty significant lag time if you're just now filing your case, because again, courts are still doubling up and trying to catch up on the March through June cases that were canceled due to the pandemic. So you're in it for a while, most likely. And so, I like to offer tips to people sometimes on how to best navigate that and what you can do to try to avoid this long delay and prolonged period where you're just sort of waiting. You can certainly begin the conversation, a dialogue with your spouse about how to resolve the issues. You can seek out a mediator. You can do that outside of the court system. You can contact an attorney to help negotiate on your behalf and communicate with the other side, sending settlement proposals back and forth. So there's a lot of things that you can do outside of the court system to try to advance the resolution and then ultimately get you a divorce even faster.
Well, Michelle, it's been a crazy year, and something
Yeah.
tells me that work will continue to be busy for you. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it, and stay healthy, okay?
Thanks for having me. You too. Thank you.